Welcome to Life Stories. What would you do if the people you trusted most betrayed you in front of everyone? When Olivia Carter sat down for Thanksgiving dinner with her husband's wealthy family, she never expected the humiliation that awaited her. Served with divorce papers and mocked for her dreams, she walked away with nothing except for a secret that would change everything. What followed was a journey of transformation, revenge, and redemption, proving that sometimes broken things become the most beautiful. Stay tuned as we unfold her incredible story. Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. The crystal wine glass shattered in my hand the moment the manila envelope hit the mahogany dining table. A sharp pain sliced through my palm, but I barely felt it. The sting was nothing compared to the humiliation searing through my chest as 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me. The warm, golden glow of the chandelier above felt suddenly harsh, casting elongated shadows over the elegantly set Thanksgiving table. I swallowed against the lump rising in my throat and forced myself to speak. "What is this?" My voice came out steadier than I expected, though my fingers trembled as I reached for the envelope. Ethan's voice was flat, practiced, like he had rehearsed this moment. Every word planned with precision. "Divorce papers." For a heartbeat. The world tilted, as if the ornate dining room in the Parker family estate had been appended. The scent of roasted turkey and cranberry sauce, once comforting, now felt cloying and intrusive. The silver cutlery gleamed under the candlelight, an absurd contrast to the suffocating reality unfolding before me. I forced my gaze up to my husband's face. Ethan Parker, the man who once held my hand through sleepless nights of painting, the man who whispered promises of forever, now wouldn't even meet my eyes. "I thought it would be better to do this here, with family present," he added, his tone mechanical. "Better for whom?" The question died in my throat as a quiet snicker broke the silence. Cora, Ethan's sister. She had been waiting for this moment. The smug twist of her lips confirmed it. Her wine glass tilted lazily in her hand, the deep red liquid sloshing close to the rim, mirroring the blood trickling from my palm. "You're serving me divorce papers at Thanksgiving dinner?" The words left my lips coated in disbelief, tasting like acid. A soft sigh, laced with manufactured sympathy, drifted from the head of the table. Eleanor Parker, Ethan's mother, sat regally in her high-backed chair, as if presiding over a courtroom instead of a family gathering. "Well, darling, we thought it would be easier this way," she said, dabbing at the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. "The family can provide emotional support." Beside me, Ellie, my best friend and the only reason I had agreed to attend this year's dinner, reached for my uninjured hand beneath the table. Her grip was firm, steadying. Thank God she was here. "Emotional support," I repeated hollowly. I watched as blood dripped onto the pristine white tablecloth, staining it in a slow, deliberate bloom of crimson. "Like the emotional support you showed last Christmas when you called my art glorified finger painting?" A sharp bark of laughter came from Cora. "Oh, Liv, let's not pretend your little hobby was ever going to amount to anything." She twirled her wine glass between manicured fingers. "Remember that gallery showing where nobody bought a single piece?" A chorus of cruel laughter rippled around the table. Even the cousins I had once thought were on my side had joined in. The betrayal settled in my chest like lead. I turned to Ethan, searching for something, anything, of the man I once loved. The man who had defended my art, who had helped me set up my small studio in the guest house of this very estate. But he still wouldn't look at me. Eleanor exhaled delicately, as if the entire affair was exhausting. "I think what everyone is trying to say," she continued, smoothing the folds of her silk blouse, "is that it's time to face reality. You're not cut out for this family. Olivia. We need someone more substantial." My uninjured hand brushed against my purse. Inside, folded neatly, was the document I had kept hidden for months, the deed to this house. The Parker family estate, signed over to me in a drunken act of generosity by Ethan on our 5th anniversary. then promptly forgotten the next morning. But I had not forgotten. A slow, foreign sense of clarity settled over me, cutting through the numb disbelief. "You're right, Eleanor," I said, standing slowly. My blooded hand hung at my side, drops of red slipping from my fingertips onto her cherished tablecloth. "I'm not cut out for this family." A flicker of satisfaction crossed Eleanor's face. Then I added, "I'm better than it." Silence fell over the room. Ethan finally looked at me, his face draining of color. "Excuse me," I said, turning to Ali. "Would you mind driving me to the emergency room? I seem to have cut myself." Ali shot me a look of wary admiration before nodding. "Of course." I turned back to the table, to the frozen expressions of the Parker family. "Oh, and Eleanor." My voice was light, almost conversational. "You might want to get the tablecloth cleaned quickly. Bloodstains are such a nightmare to remove." I let that settle. Then added, "Almost as difficult as eviction notices." A sharp clatter rang through the room as Eleanor's fork slipped from her fingers and hit her plate. "Eviction notices," she echoed, her composure cracking for the first time. I smiled. A slow, knowing smile. "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone," I said, glancing around at their stunned faces. "Enjoy the turkey. It might be your last meal in this dining room." As I walked away, my heels clicking against the marble floor, the silence behind me was deafening. But as soon as I reached the grand entrance hall, chaos erupted. Raised voices, slamming doors, Ethan calling my name. Ali grabbed my arm, ushering me toward the door. "Holy shit," she whispered as we stepped outside into the cold Connecticut air. "Are you okay?" I glanced back at the estate, the Grand Parker mansion, its windows glowing warm and inviting, a facade of a home that had never truly been mine. "No," I admitted, my voice quiet but certain. "But I will be." The cold air outside the Parker estate bit into my skin, but I barely noticed. My mind was still spinning, replaying the scene over and over, the envelope, the laughter, Ethan's expression when he realized I wasn't the same woman he thought he could walk over. Ali opened the car door for me, her brows furrowed with concern. "Liv, you're bleeding everywhere. Get in. We'll head to the hospital." I obeyed numbly, pressing my napkin-wrapped hand against my palm, watching as the white fabric darkened with my blood. The pain had started to register now, a dull throb beneath the larger ache that sat heavy in my chest. As Ali started the engine, she shot me a sideways glance. "Are you going to tell me what the hell just happened back there?" I took a slow breath. "Ethan doesn't know." "Doesn't know what?" I turned to face her, my lips curling into the first real smile I'd had all night. "That I own the house." Ali nearly slammed the brakes. "Excuse me?" "He signed the deed over to me last year when he was drunk. He forgot by morning. But I didn't." I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes. "So they can mock my art. They can throw me out of their family. But they can't throw me out of that house. Because it's mine." Ali let out a low whistle. "Holy shit." At the hospital, the emergency room was quiet. Just a few nurses moving through the corridors. As a doctor stitched up my hand, Ali paced beside me, her arms crossed. "You know what this means, right?" she said finally. I raised an eyebrow. "That I should stop drinking wine from crystal glasses?" "No," she smirked, shaking her head. "That you have the ultimate revenge card in your pocket. What are you gonna do with it?" I looked down at my bandaged hand. I hadn't thought that far ahead yet. All I knew was that I wasn't going to let the Parkers win. As the doctor finished, I pulled out my phone. There was already a flood of missed calls and messages from Ethan. I ignored them all. Instead, I scrolled to another name. Frank Delgado. I hesitated for only a second before pressing the call button. He answered on the second ring. "Olivia? It's late. Is everything all right?" I let out a breath. "Frank, I think I'm finally ready." A pause. Then, warm approval in his voice. Good. Come by the studio tomorrow. We have work to do. The next morning, I stepped into Frank's art restoration studio, inhaling the familiar scent of linseed oil and varnish. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, dust motes swirling in the golden glow. Frank, a man in his 60s with silver-streaked hair and kind but sharp eyes, stood by a work table, carefully restoring an 18th-century painting. He glanced up as I entered. "You look terrible," he remarked, setting down his brush. "Thanks," I muttered. "You always know how to make a girl feel welcome." He chuckled, gesturing for me to sit. "So, tell me why you're finally ready." I met his gaze. No hesitation this time. "Because they tried to break me." Frank nodded slowly. "And now you want to build something instead." I exhaled, steadying myself. "I have the house, and I want to turn it into something that matters. Not a hollow monument to a family obsessed with appearances. I want to turn it into an art restoration gallery, a place for broken things to be made whole again." Frank smiled, his eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite name, pride. "Perhaps. Now that is a vision worth fighting for." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The Parker estate loomed before me as I stepped out of the car, my breath curling into the crisp Connecticut air. Only this time, I wasn't returning as the woman they had humiliated at Thanksgiving dinner. I was returning as the owner. Ellie, standing beside me, let out a low whistle. "So, what's the plan? You gonna walk in there like a queen and throw them all out?" I smirked. "Tempting. But no. We're starting renovations today." Her eyes widened. "You didn't waste any time." "Huh." I shook my head. "Time is the one thing I'm done wasting on them." Inside, the estate was eerily quiet. The lingering scent of last week's Thanksgiving feast still in the air. It felt surreal walking through the grand hallway, past the gilded mirrors and heavy chandeliers, knowing that everything I touched now belonged to me. As I reached the dining room, the very place where my life had unraveled, I found the table still set, as if waiting for a meal that would never come. A stain remained on the white tablecloth. My blood. A twisted sort of poetry. The sound of footsteps pulled me from my thoughts. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You're back." I lifted my chin. "I never left." "Not really." His eyes darted around the room, as if seeing it for the first time. "Liv, we need to talk." I crossed my arms. "Funny. You weren't interested in talking when you handed me divorce papers in front of your entire family." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was an idiot." "Yes." I agreed easily. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Look. Mom's freaking out. You can't just kick us out of our family home." I arched an eyebrow. "I can. And I am." "You don't even need this house," he argued. "You could sell it. Make a fortune. Start over somewhere new." I shook my head. "That's where you're wrong. I do need this house. Because I'm turning it into something worth remembering. A place for artists. Restorers, a place for people who create. Not just inherit." Ethan's face paled. "Liv." Before he could finish, a new voice cut in. "You selfish. Vindictive. Cora." She stormed in, her coat barely hanging onto her shoulders. Her hands curled into fists. But it wasn't anger in her eyes, it was desperation. "You can't do this," she snapped. "This house is supposed to be ours. Ethan and I grew up here." I tilted my head. "And yet, it never really felt like home to me." Cora's glare wavered. "You're just doing this to get back at us." I smiled. But there was no warmth in it. "No. Cora. I'm doing this because I deserve better than what you all gave me." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Liv, please. If not for us, then for her." It took me a second to realize what he meant. My eyes dropped to Cora's stomach, only now did I notice the slight swell beneath her coat. She was pregnant. I blinked, absorbing the weight of that knowledge. You think that's going to change anything? I asked quietly. Cora's chin lifted. This house is meant to stay in the family. I met her gaze. Then maybe you should have treated me like family. Silence stretched between us. Ethan looked away first. Cora let out a breath, suddenly looking exhausted. So that's it. You're just going to throw a pregnant woman onto the street. I studied her carefully. I had every right to. After everything she had done. Every cruel word. Every moment she had made me feel like I was less, I had earned my victory. But I wasn't like them. The guest house is empty. I said finally. You can stay there until you figure things out. Cora stared at me, confusion flickering in her eyes. Why would you do that? I shrugged. Because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go. Ethan let out a long breath. Liv. I turned to him. We're done. Ethan. And just like that, I walked away, leaving them in a house that no longer belonged to them. The night of the gallery's grand opening, the Parker estate was transformed. Gone were the heavy velvet drapes and gilded wallpaper, the suffocating remnants of a family clinging to its past. In their place, soft lighting illuminated sleek gallery walls, each adorned with restored masterpieces, each piece telling a story of destruction and rebirth. I stood near the entrance, watching the guests arrive, critics from the New York Times, renowned collectors, young artists eager to see the space. The sound of glasses clinking and murmured conversation filled the air. The house felt alive in a way it never had before. Ali appeared at my side, breathless with excitement. Liv, you won't believe who just walked in, the director from the Modern. And that guy from the Times who never gives good reviews. He's actually smiling. I let out a breath, gripping my champagne glass a little tighter. This is real. I did this. Ali nudged me. Heads up. Trouble at 3 o'clock. I turned. And there they were. Eleanor, draped in funeral black, her sharp eyes scanning the room like a general surveying a battlefield. Behind her, Ethan and Cora, looking markedly less sure of themselves. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Just a few weeks ago, they had looked down on me from their thrones. Now, they had to walk through a house that no longer belonged to them, surrounded by people celebrating my success. Eleanor met my gaze and strode toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floors. Olivia. I raised my glass to her. Eleanor. Enjoying the gallery? Her lips pursed. This spectacle is nothing more than a tantrum, a desperate attempt to embarrass this family. I tilted my head. You did a pretty good job of that all on your own. Eleanor's jaw tightened. But I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I gestured toward the triptych at the center of the gallery, my most personal piece. Let me introduce you to Thanksgiving Grace, I said, loud enough for a few onlookers to turn their heads. It's a study in destruction and transformation. The first panel shows a shattered wine glass, recognize that. Eleanor. Her eyes flicked to the painting, to the broken glass frozen mid-fall. Drops of red wine, or was it blood, scattered like constellations. The New York Times critic stepped forward. Intrigued. Fascinating symbolism, he murmured, jotting something down. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but I saw her grip tighten on her clutch. The second panel, I continued, voice smooth as silk, represents chaos. The moment everything you believed to be stable crumbles beneath you. I turned to her, letting the meaning settle. And the third, well, that's where the beauty comes in. She followed my gaze to the final painting, the same shards of glass, now transformed into a prism of color, light reflecting in unexpected, breathtaking ways. True legacy, I said, meeting her eyes, isn't about clinging to the past. It's about turning it into something meaningful. For a long moment, she said nothing. Around us, the crowd murmured their approval. I could see the realization creeping over her, the bitter understanding that she had lost. Not just this house, but the power she once held over me. You think you've won something here, she whispered. You've destroyed our home. I smiled. No, Eleanor. I gave it a purpose. As the crowd turned back to the art, Eleanor stood stiffly, her composure cracking just slightly. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away, Ethan and Cora trailing behind her. I let out a slow breath, turning back to my guests. The night was far from over, and I had a new life to step into. One built not on revenge, but on creation. The morning after the grand opening, I stood in the gallery alone, letting the silence settle around me. The house, once filled with voices that sought to diminish me, now carried whispers of possibility. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the paintings, the sculptures, the very walls that had witnessed my humiliation but now held my triumph. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Eleanor Parker standing on the front step. But something about her was different. Gone was the immaculate armor of wealth, the perfectly tailored dress, the diamonds at her throat. She looked smaller, as if the weight of her own legacy had finally caught up with her. In her hands, she clutched a canvas wrapped in cloth. Olivia, she said, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I crossed my arms. Eleanor. She hesitated, then held out the bundle. This was in my mother's attic. I thought maybe you could restore it. Curiosity got the better of me. I unwrapped the cloth carefully, revealing an old wedding portrait. Eleanor and her late husband. Young and glowing, their smiles frozen in time. The paint was cracked, the colors dulled by decades of neglect. I ran my fingers lightly over the surface. Why bring this to me? Eleanor's throat bobbed. Because you're the best. And because. She hesitated, exhaling shakily. Because I owe you an apology. I studied her face, searching for any sign of manipulation. But there was none. Just the weary acceptance of a woman who had lost everything and was finally starting to see the truth. I was wrong about you, she admitted. About your talent. Your vision. Everything. I was so focused on preserving what was. I couldn't see what could be. She gave a sad little laugh. Like my son. Like our so-called legacy. I thought of Ethan. Of the way he had clung to the illusion of his family's importance. Of how quickly that illusion had crumbled. And now you want me to fix this? I murmured. Nodding at the painting. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. I want you to restore it. But not for free. She met my gaze. Something like humility in her eyes. I heard Cora is stepping back from the gallery soon. You'll need someone to help manage the administrative side. My brows lifted in surprise. You work for me? She nodded once. Trust is earned. I don't expect you to trust me yet. But I need a job. And I want this painting, this memory, preserved. I considered her for a long moment. Then glanced down at the portrait again. Beneath the dust and damage, there was something worth saving. Just like her. Be here Monday at 9. I said finally. We'll start with filing. Eleanor's breath caught slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to actually say yes. Then she nodded. Thank you, Olivia. As she turned to leave, I added, Eleanor. She paused. I met her gaze. I'll make it beautiful again. But it won't be exactly the same. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Maybe that's the point. I watched her walk away, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about rebuilding. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The Parker estate no longer felt like a place of ghosts. It wasn't a monument to a broken past or a battlefield of old wounds. It was something new, alive, evolving, filled with light and purpose. As I stepped into the restoration studio, the scent of linseed oil and fresh paint wrapped around me like a promise. Across the room, apprentices carefully restored antique frames. their fingers steady with the patience of artists who understood that beauty often came from what was once damaged. I glanced at Eleanor, now deep in paperwork, and Cora, rocking her newborn near the gallery's sunlit windows. Life had a way of surprising us. I picked up my brush, running my fingers over the now finished Thanksgiving grace. It wasn't just a painting. It was proof. Proof that sometimes the best art comes from what others tried to break. And I had never felt stronger. Subscribe to Life Stories for more.